interviewing Doris Ibbetson, who was born and grew up in East Dorset, Vermont, and she's a spry, young 97-year-old who's going to she's a spry 98-year-old who's going to share her stories about growing up and living in East Dorset.
I had 3 brothers and 1 sister, and then I had 3 half-sisters, older than me. So I have memories of the creamery in Manchester, in East Dorset, running. And when they used to cut ice on the pond down at the South Village, and they cut the ice and they stored it in the ice house at the creamery and covered it with sawdust. So we'll keep. And then I remember the big old square Brophy store that's right across from the Oleus Inn. And that was running back then. Oh, and where the post office is now, over beyond that, I guess it's to the east, was this marble yard. That's where the road is now. That was all marble yard there. All kinds of marble, like we see in the picture you have. Yeah. And they had shops there where they work that marble. They make headstones and floor, door steps and stuff like that. And
do you remember that mill operating when you were growing up?
I remember working out in there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And what do you remember happened to that mill?
Well, as I got older, it just disappeared. It just, the road came in, and when that road was changed, then they had to take all that marble all the way, I suppose. And then they put the road in there. But like I said, it sort of like disappeared, over the years. To me, it did,
Doris, where did you go to school?
I went to school in East Dorset till the 6th grade. Then I came to Manchester and lived with my grandparents and went to school 7th and 8th grades in Manchester Center. But the school is now demolished. That's the one near the Episcopal Church. Oh yes, then there was a store right across from the house where we lived in on Mad Tom Road that burned. It was Howard Brophy's father's store, and it burnt in the middle of winter. And I would say I was about probably 4 years old, because my mother and father we were right across the road from the store. My mother and father got us up in the night, it was in the winter, and got all our winter clothes on us because they thought we'd have to get out, because we'd put our hands on the windows and those panes would be red hot from the fire. And that store burned up and stuff was blowing up out of the cellars, and it burnt right to the ground. But I guess it was quite a loss because they sold everything in that store, everything that people would need in that day. Yeah.
What did your father do?
My father was a painter and a wallpaper hanger.
Okay.
But he can do other jobs, like he could lay his hand to most anything. And a lot of them had little farms, the people that had, they called them little farms, but they had like a cow or two and chickens and a garden and all that, So that's how they substituted their food from raising it. I think a lot of people did then. They had cows, they had their own milk and everything. Yeah. But mostly it was like small farms. Yeah. Except for that creamery, that was a big deal, you know. Yeah. And that, you know, they cut the ice and all that stuff.
What did you remember doing for entertainment? Playing?
No, we would play, even in the winter, we'd go outdoors and play all day long in an old chicken house we had on our property, my father's property. And all the neighbor kids would get together, and there'd be the mother and the father, and we'd be families, and we had old broken dishes. We'd play all day long there. They'd have to call us into supper when it was time, you know. Yeah, we did that, and then we'd slide downhill. Had sleds, and we'd slide, and we'd go skating down on the pond. I can remember skating on the pond and going so close to the channel there, and my father was getting that ice out. He was having a fit because we were too close, you know. But those are some of the things we did.
And you talk about the pond, you're talking about the one in South Village.
Yeah, South Village.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we had to make our own entertainment.
Absolutely.
We didn't have any fancy toys or none. I mean, we had a sled.
So when you were sliding, what hill did you slide down?
Well, we'd go out top of the hill there, out of the village, on the main town road, and slide from there clear way down to the crossing by the post office, or out on a meadow, you know. A couple of meadows there.
So you were sliding right down Mad Tom Road.
There was no cars then.
Was that road paved at that time?
No.
No, of course not.
It was
Do you remember it being paved?
sort of. Not really. But.
Tell them about the time Bucky fell out of the car.
Well, my father had this big old Dodge, I think it was, a big old square car. And my mother and father put all us 5 kids in the back seat. We went somewhere I forgot where, but we were coming home from the village up through that long hill. One of my brothers, the middle one, he fiddled around and he fell out of the car. And we shut the door and left him there. And so we got home and my mother and father said, "We're missing one kid here." We said, "We told you he fell out." So we had to go back down. My father had to go back down and pick him up. Yeah. Yeah.
So your parents did own a car?
Yeah, at one time there.
Yeah, and
Not very long.
did you go, where did you go in the car?
I just remember he'd take us riding. I think we went over to Lake St. Catherine once or twice. Because my parents had friends over there. They'd go and visit with them and we'd go play in the water. Yeah.
Did they go to dances and stuff?
Well, they went to dances. Of course, we were too young. But when I got old enough to learn to dance, my father taught me to dance. Round dance. And of course, we learned to square dance. One time, the hall was upstairs over where the school was in East Dorset. And so, one time we were down there at a dance, and my mother wouldn't dance with my father because he'd been drinking. So he went and got a broom and danced that all over the floor. Danced with it anyway.
And how else was the room over the school used?
Oh, well, we had that play there, that Shuffle Off to Buffalo. They have one of those every couple of seasons, right?
I think so.
And everybody would go to it, and about everybody in the town was in it, I think. And I think they had a great time in that play. They class.
Do you remember who your teacher was?
Yes, Mrs. Abbott. Yeah, she's in one of those pictures here.
Yep.
Yeah, she used to take us on Memorial Day to the Catholic cemetery there in East Dorset. where the Catholic Church is. And she'd line us all up and give us each a little bouquet. And when she was ready, she marched us up to the graveyard. And we'd all put our flowers in the graves there. On the graves, you know. Yeah, I remember that every time I go there. Yeah.
And was the train running?
Oh, yes.
And did you ever ride the train?
Once or twice, yeah.
To where?
Big deal. Rutland.
Ah.
Oh, Rutland or Bennington. One of the trains didn't stop. They called it the Flyer. Well, when that came down through, the postmaster, or whatever you call him, station master, he had a bag of mail. He'd hitch it on a big long pole that moved like the, would move. And when that train went by, they'd hook that off there, and he'd hook another one on to go somewhere else. But that train didn't stop. It was really going. Big train. But, they did stop sometimes for passengers. Oh, yeah, I can remember riding on that train to Rutland to one time. One time I went up there when I was married to her father. And I wanted a rug for my kitchen, so linoleum rug. So I got it, and it was rolled up. I don't know how I got it on the train, but they put it on the train for me, and it came down to East Dorset. That was really something, huh?
So was the train station in
Yeah.
East Dorset when you lived there?
Yeah.
That was still there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
You have pictures of that.
Yeah, I do have pictures of that.
That was a nice station.
Yeah.
Big one, but...
Do you remember other businesses that were in the village? Was there a blacksmith or a shoemaker, or there were two stores?
I think there was one little man that was a shoemaker. He had a little small building sort of across from where the post office was then. And he was some kind of a foreigner. And he made shoes and repaired shoes. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And what about, was there a doctor that was?
Oh, yeah. Dr. Cochran. And his home is still up there. Right across from right across from the firehouse. That big house with a porch. That was Dr. Cochran's house. And he was a doctor during World War I, he told me. Because I went to him once when I smashed a nail in my knee, and he put Clorox and a bandage with Clorox on it. He said that's all we had during the war. I remember that and being in his office down there in that house. Oh, he lived to be an old man. And then they had Dr. Campbell in Manchester after that.
Didn't he go and get the iron water for people?
Yeah.
Told him about that?
He used to go up Mad Tom little ways and get water because it had iron in it. And you could see the funny stuff coming out of there where that iron was. It was a dark color. Yeah.
What about Mr. Parson? How about Bob Brock going to the orchard?
Oh yeah, Bob Brock, he worked at Parsons Orchard, which was going full blast then, and it was really producing apples. But now it's Mad Tom Orchard. And I think maybe some of those, I would think that some of those originally trees would still be there. There was this old man that lived way up the road from where we lived, about 2 or 3 miles. Mr. Baker, and he had a wooden leg on one leg from the knee down. Boy, we thought that was great, us kids. And every day he'd take his milk to the creamery down past where we lived. And he'd have about 4 cans of milk in the back of his little buggy. And my sister and I'd fight over who was going to ride with him. He was an old man, That was funny.
You mentioned buggy. Was it a buggy or a
Yeah, it was a
truck?
buggy
Oh, a horse and buggy.
in the summertime.
Yeah.
In the winter, it was a dray, yeah. And a lot of times, they'd let us ride on the dray
Uh-huh.
to school. His son. Let us go.
You
Yeah.
talked about helping somebody gather sap.
Yep, old Pinch Eggleston, his name was. That was his nickname. He had sugar woods across the river there, and he had us kids out there. We'd work all day long. We'd be wet clear up to our stomachs there, 'cause you didn't have ski pants back then, you know. We had, us girls would put on old men's old pants or something, and boots or whatever. Well, we'd spend all day. We were happy out there. We'd go home just in time for supper.
Where was that orchard?
That
Or where were you collecting sap?
that was just across the river from where we
On
lived,
Rocky Lane, where Dad had the house. It was over across through there.
where our house was up, our second house up there. He also had a big meadow there. One summer he planted it to potatoes. And don't you know, he hooked my sister and I into picking those things for bugs. And for each bucket full of bugs we got, we'd get a nickel. And then
Oh my God.
he'd give us a nickel. But then he'd have to kiss us. I said, oh my God. I didn't like him to kiss me, but I wanted that nickel so bad. So I let him kiss me, and he was an old whiskery guy, you know. And so I got my nickel for
And then what did you do with your nickel?
run down the store and get candy. And if we had a big beer bottle, it's worth a nickel turn in, and you take it down to the store and you get a nickel. And boy, you could get all kinds of candy, penny candy. I'd get a big bag of candy, and then all my brothers and sisters would be following me home. I remember them following me home, down. And we argue all the way, but in the end I gave them some candy. What else?
And you said that when Howard closed the store, his father's store, the last store, he gave you kids candy and
Yeah.
stuff.
Stuff they didn't want. Stuff. Yeah, and the store that across from the hotel there, what's the name?
Cunningham's,
Huh?
the bar,
Yeah, and
the Cunningham.
yeah, we didn't, you know, it didn't burn, that one didn't burn, of course. And they cleaned the house evidently because they got some stuff out of that old store that burnt, that didn't burn, to put down there, I guess. Yeah.
Do you remember when the store was closed? Brophy closed his store?
The one that burnt?
No, the
Second
one
one.
across
Oh, the one now.
the flat roof building.
Yeah. Well, I think that was back in the 30s sometime.
So when did you leave East Dorset and you've been living in Manchester ever since?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think. Big move.
What year? What year?
What?
What year she wants to know?
Don't ask me. What
I would
year?
say probably 46, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you left East Dorset, but you've stayed in the area.
Yeah, oh yes,
Yeah, yeah.
right here.
Yeah.
Except for a couple trips to California.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing your memories. We wanted to kind of make this short and sweet, and I love hearing what you have to say, and so we'll just maybe pick up in a minute with Nora outside.
My name is Nora Gay Larson. I was born in 1938 in Putnam Memorial Hospital in Bennington. My mother was not able to have me at home because I was a breech, so I was taken down there. My parents, Russell Gay and Doris Bowen Gay, lived with her parents Ed and Vivian Bowen on, I think it's 550 Mad Tom Road now. And we lived there until I was about 5 years old. My dad bought property across what is now Rocky Lane from Frank Benedict. He bought 30 acres of land, and there was an old house over there that he and my grandfather Gay and great-grandfather Parkinson and my grandfather Bowen and my uncle, great-uncle Nelson renovated the house partially, as it was never finished upstairs. I can remember being in my grandparents' house when I was probably up till I was 5 or so, and there was a horse pastured across the way that my mother caught me underneath the horse's feet one day because I loved the horses. And I remember playing. My mom had 3 younger brothers and a younger sister, and I can remember playing with my uncles. The youngest one was 10 years older than I can remember playing with them, going sliding with them. When I started school in 1944, and we were living, I believe, over in the house on Rocky Lane. We must have walked to school for the first year because it was wartime, but I can remember us having Mrs. Abbott as a teacher, and Mrs. Abbott had my great-uncle Nelson and my mother and all her brothers and sisters as students. And she was a great teacher. It was a four-room schoolhouse, and we had all 4 grades, so you could listen to the other kids' lessons. And I remember there was a series of books about different foreign countries, and I think I went through every one of those books because they were so interesting. I do remember one time there was an older boy who I think he probably had some learning disability, and she was trying to correct him, and I remember him shoving her, but she never lost her cool. She just went along with the whole thing. I remember the things we used to do for fun. We had non-stop games on the lawn at the house. We'd play until dark in the summer. We had a little sugaring thing. All the neighborhood kids came over, and we had a wash basin or something that we were boiling in. I can remember going to help get the cows. My dad had a small farm. Going fishing in the brook. And the story my mother likes to tell is there was a little trickle in the dooryard, and she'd send me out there with a worm on a hook, and the water, was 2 inches deep, until one of her brothers said, "Oh, what are you fishing there for? There's no fish there." And then I ran away to the brook. But I do remember, having a good time as a kid, going out into the woods when I was probably 4 or 5 years old and picking flowers and never being scared. It was a great time we played with the neighborhood kids. My father had come to town to help build the bypass. He was worked for the Hunt Construction, and he had apparently boarded at Cunningham's, who had what is now the Aeolus Inn. It was a bar, and I was very attached to the Cunninghams. I was named after Nora Cunningham, who was their daughter, and I can remember going to Mrs. Cunningham's house because they had a parrot, and the parrot would say Nora because that was named after the daughter. So I thought the parrot was talking to me. I had a great aunt and uncle that lived on Pleasant Street at the time. Uncle Dave and Aunt Helena, and Uncle Dave had been one of the early linemen, and he was electrocuted but survived it. So he was paralyzed, but they lived in the house on Pleasant Street until the 70s, till he passed away. I stayed in East Dorset until I think probably 48. My parents had separated, but I stayed with my dad, and I had friends. We knew the Benedicts. My stepsister, who eventually became my stepsister, was the oldest Benedict girl's daughter, and we played together when we were kids. And I'm still in touch with her. And I can remember being in the old Benedict house. We used to play hide and seek. There was a grandfather's clock in the kitchen, and she was little. She'd hide in the clock. It was a fun time, to be in school. I do remember getting in a scuffle with one kid in the schoolyard, and my mother got in a scuffle that she didn't tell about when my Uncle Earl, who was little, had his first day at school. They didn't have lunch boxes. They had a little tobacco box. He had his lunch in, which he was very proud of. And apparently it was even before school started. And some kid decided that he didn't like his lunchbox, and he kicked his lunchbox off the thing, and I guess my mother tackled the kid. He dragged her around the schoolyard, and the teacher finally came and separated him and sent my mother home. But my grandmother and grandfather came back, I guess, a little bit perturbed about my mother being sent home, but I guess she was like a bulldog. She never gave up. I remember my mother worked for Mark Whalen for a while. He was the postmaster, and I can remember she was house cleaning or something, and she sat me in a big Morris chair, and I remember looking at his books, and I have his books of poetry, which I like very much. We used to. There was an older gentleman that lived up the road. Beyond, it's near where Havoc Hill is now. His name was Charlie Ritchie. It was an old house, and he was an illiterate old gentleman, and I think he worked for the Rich job. Or the Griffith job up there. And that's why he had the house. And he had. They were really poor. I remember Mom telling that when she was young, the son was walking to school with newspapers or something wrapped around his feet, and my grandfather went upstairs and got an old pair of boots to give to the kid because he was literally barefoot. Mark Whalen used to bring him mail, and the story is that he had the newspaper with the ship upside down, and he said, by the paper I see there's a big shipwreck, but he had the picture upside down. And the story was when we went in and he played the song on the fiddle, my mother said, I said to him when I was, well, you only know one tune, right, Charlie? But, and he used to come and work for my dad, and there was an old gentleman named Mick Gormley who had a farm further down. It's closer to where it was moved back from the road. It's closer to where the horses are now. And they would fight because one was Irish and one was French, and they'd fight. They'd come and help Dad, I guess, probably when they were building, because they built the house and they built a rather large barn, and probably when they were building the barn. And there was actually over in the woods below that an old sugaring house, and I can remember vaguely being there when they were boiling, but I could not have been very old. My father probably must have been helping him, and we get after the town started having a bus, which was probably 46 or so. We went there to get the bus, but I can remember during wartime buying war stamps, and remember going out. We were picking milkweed pods because they were using them for K-pop. It was for something for the war effort, some kind of insulation that they used them for. I can remember doing that. But you take your pennies to school, I guess maybe every week or so, and buy your stamp. And I had a book, and I can remember the rationing. I can remember my father complaining that he was sick of fried bologna because that was all you could get from me. And I think one of my happiest memories was. We were going in the car probably to Manchester, and we stopped at Ray Wilbur's store in the South Village, and I can remember the first Eskimo pie I had. That was a treat. I remember. Of course, it was wartime, and I don't imagine there was much sugar or whatever. But